Hey STRU friends, this is your personal invitation to co-invest alongside me. If you haven't heard, I've launched Stomp Capital Short-Term Rental Opportunities Fund, where I will be personally investing all of my short-term rentals going forward. And if you're an accredited investor and you want instant diversification and you want to participate in the best ideas that I identify, you relate to all of my teachings and the uniqueness and the sense of place and all of that stuff, then please click on the description below and find out more about Stomp Capital short-term rental opportunities. The best is yet to come and we're literally getting started. I would love to have you alongside, so let's go. Hey YouTube, what's happening? It's Richard, founder of STRU and professional real estate developer. And today we're going to answer one more of these Twitter questions because I think it's a really important question and it could drive all of your investment strategy and returns going forward. So without further ado, what is this Twitter question? Well, the question is, Richard, you teach a lot about zoning and the importance of zoning, and I've heard you discuss things like zoning by right. What exactly does that mean? And as we build our portfolio, what should we be looking for in terms of zoning and how do we get caught up on that? So let's get into it. So the very first thing I need to share with you is one, I am not an attorney, I am not a zoning expert, I'm not a zoning consultant, I don't even play one on YouTube. So this is just a layman's approach to practical approach to zoning, and in specific, short-term rental zoning and the regulatory concerns that many of us have. And if you don't have them, you need to have them because this is probably the biggest threat if you come from a scarcity mindset, and also opportunity if you come from an abundance mindset. Guess which camp I play in? Abundance. I think regulation is our friend. It's here to stay. It's getting better for us. And so we just need to understand what those rules are. And the question is, how do we get it? So the first thing that many of you asked about when it came to the Stomp Capital launch was, I shared with you that the Jackson Hole opportunity, where we're buying up to 35,000 square feet of development rights for short-term rentals, is zoned by right. And many of you asked what that means. Specifically, what it means is when you uncover the zoning regulations in your town, in your county, in your city, in your community, you have to look at what the zoning is, and they've got different classifications of zoning. Some might be, say, residential zoning, which means you can't have commercial. Some might be commercial zoning, which means you can't have residential. And then within the commercial zoning, there might be different types of zoning that is allowed. And when I say allowed, like encouraged, that's what the zone is for. That's where they may want, say, restaurants or hotels or lodging or live music. Like they want to contain it in that area so that the residential areas are unaffected. So you need to drill down and understand what zone you're in and then what the use cases are allowed in that zoning. And in the Jackson Hole example that I'm giving you, the zoning that we are buying, and we're about to close in a couple of weeks, will probably be closed by the time you get this in interest of full disclosure, is zoned for short-term rentals or lodging or hospitality or hotels or motels specifically. Said differently, the town of Jackson Hole has designated the area, the exact street, the exact block, the exact location that we are purchasing as where they want guests to stay overnight. Now, I don't know when they adopted that ordinance, and I don't know if they were thinking it was more traditional hotel or if it was an accommodation to short-term rentals and Airbnb or some combination thereof. But what I do know with my expert due diligence team is there's no difference whether we're doing hospitality like an overnight hotel or short-term rentals by the night or the week or the month or whatever. So when I say it's by right, this is exactly what the town wants in these locations. And that doesn't mean that we're, free from changes and free from rules and so on and so forth, but it makes it much more likely that we have a very long runway because they've designated this area, this parcel and the surrounds as where they want people to have restaurants and where they want people to have hospitality assets. And that being said, it keeps the residential community purely residential. So that's the by right example. The other thing that you should do, and you may not be looking at places that are by right because in many of these instances and geographies and locations, we're retrofitting, we're taking existing housing inventory and we're converting that into short-term rentals. So like it may not have by right lodging and hospitality. And the lack of law doesn't mean that it's lawful, it just means it's yet to be regulated. So ideally, if you're in a residential area and in zoned residential, you're going to want to see secondary regulatory understanding about how you can short-term rent. Maybe it's the frequency, maybe it's some procedures, maybe there's a permit, maybe there's an application. The best communities, and I've got another one in Jackson Hole, we have a fire chief inspection, we have a permitting process. There's all sorts of hoops and hurdles that we have to jump through so that the town understands that the license that they're giving us, is safe, is professional, is hospitable, and that we're not doing things just like willy-nilly, right? Like there's a process and a procedure and we have to adhere to it. And if you don't, you get fined and you can lose your short-term rental license. And, as a professional host, I wouldn't do that. So look for places that have really clear communication, and more of these hurdles and more of these obstacles makes it more desirable because you know exactly what to do. And many people entering the space either won't do that or they won't perform. And so consequently, you could start to build your moat in a highly desirable area. Now, the red flag or the cautionary flag that I would throw out is if the regulation is too onerous and too strict and they start restricting like how many vacation stays you can have, and the city of Palm Springs comes to mind. You can only have 32 vacation rentals in the course of a year. You have to start thinking about that in your business. Like, does it make sense? Can you monetize it? Is it a good rate of return? And what happens if they change and they go from 32 to 28 or 28 to 22? Or in Crested Butte, Colorado, another area that I absolutely love and I've lived there before, they've put a moratorium on short-term rental licenses. And so these regulations are changing constantly, continually, and it is my firm belief that the pendulum swings too far. Too much regulation, then it'll probably swing too far to too little regulation, and over time we get to sort of like that middle spot, which makes sense not only for the community but for the guests and for the hosts and the entrepreneurs and the town and the tax regime and so on. So the pendulum swings too far. It always does when there's a disruptive technology, but pay close attention because you want to be operating legally, sustainably, with a long runway, and you want to find these communities where they've got proper regulation in mind. I always recommend that you take a second step and take a look at places that actually tax overnight lodging, motel tax, hotel tax, bed tax, whatever they call it, because those communities actually are welcoming you. By creating a tax on your guests that your guests pay, that means that the community is basically your partner in this business. They need that tax revenue to improve the roads and keep the lights on and capital improvements, schools, education, and so on. So find communities where there is regulation, find communities where there is taxes, because that's going to give you the longest runway. And if you can, go even further upstream and try and find zoning that's by right, where you're allowed to do it. And I just want to give you an example just in case it's not clear. If you were trying to open, say, a restaurant, you wouldn't try and do it in a residential area. It wouldn't make any sense. So you would look for commercial zoning, and specifically within the commercial zoning, you would be looking for areas, blocks, parcels, whatever, where restaurants are allowed, right? Without any special, like I have to apply for a variance, I have to apply for a permit. I mean, you have to do everything to like their building standards and fire code, and there's all things that you have to adhere to. But if you want to open a restaurant in that zoning, by right, you're entitled to do it as long as you do it lawfully and with all the right permits in place. So extend that same logic as you look for short-term rentals. Try and find places where it's by right. And in many of those places, it's historic like vacation rental areas, because the vacation rental areas actually require taxes to keep their community going, and the way they get their taxes is from short-term rental stays. So I hope this answered your question on Twitter. Leave your comments and questions below. What other things do you look for when you take a look at regulatory regime and zoning and all of that? In case I've missed anything, we should all benefit from one another's knowledge. 2, come check me out on Twitter at I'm Richard Fertig. 3, like the video. 4, subscribe to the channel. 5, have a wonderful night. Thank you. Hey STRU friends, this is your personal invitation to co-invest alongside me. If you haven't heard, I've launched Stomp Capital Short-Term Rental Opportunities Fund, where I will be personally investing all of my short-term rentals going forward. And if you're an accredited investor and you want instant diversification and you want to participate in the best ideas that I identify, you relate to all of my teachings and the uniqueness and the sense of place and all of that stuff, then please click on the description below and find out more about Stomp Capital Short-Term Rental Opportunities. The best is yet to come, and we're literally getting started. I would love to have you alongside, so let's go.